So, introduce Ray Edmondson, who's going to start things off.
Thank you, David. Well, welcome to today's webinar with Martie and Richard Lowenstein. I'm Ray Edmondson, the president of the Friends of the NFSA, and coming to you from here in Canberra, in Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. I'll introduce Martie and hand over to her to sort of take us to the next thing. Martie is a researcher and has gained the National Folk Fellowship for 2023 from the National Library of the National Folk Festival, and with her brother Richard, who's obviously a well-known filmmaker and nothing needs no introduction, have put together a film about their mother, Wendy Lowenstein. And so I'll hand over to Martie now, if you'll introduce yourself and the film for us, please, Martie.
I will. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming today. This documentary started life late last year when I was awarded the 2023 Folk Fellowship by the National Library and the National Folk Festival, and it was originally called What Wendy Found, and it set out to depict the search for everyday social culture in Australia, the songs and the stories and the dances which led to the Australian folk revival, and two highly committed women who were dynamic innovators in recording the early history of Australian culture. But the project evolved into a much broader record of that period when Richard, knowing much more about film and documentary than I did, insisted we needed to cover the philosophical and political backstory of the idealistic period people who set out to find everyday Australians working social culture. And radically for that time, they insisted also that this included Indigenous working people's songs and stories. So now the film won't fit into 25 minutes. It requires a full-length documentary to show the broader picture of the 60s and 70s. And we want to fund a full-length documentary, but we'll talk more about that later. For Richard and myself, it all started in our primary school days with children's rhymes like this one. Cinderella, dressed in yellow, went upstairs to kiss her fella. On the way, her breeches busted, how many people were disgusted. Thank you. Children's rhymes were the first folklore my mother Wendy collected. And does anyone remember Cinderella Dressed in Yellow, the highly popular book of naughty children's rhymes? And later there was Far Out Brussels Sprout, All Right Vegemite, and things like that. Books like that were published by June Factor, who's with us today. In 1953, when my mum was pregnant with me, she and Ian Turner, later Professor Ian Turner, started the Victorian Folklore Society. Ian Turner, who was Professor of History at Monash University eventually, had the idea to have a definitive study of Australian children's rhymes. Doesn't that sound lovely and academic? He wrote an academic interpretive essay, and the infamous book of Naughty Children's Rhymes was published in 1969. Mum was teaching at Richmond Girls' School, and Turner lived close to the school, and he asked Mum to collect rhymes from the school. And I'm absolutely sure she had a fantastic time cajoling the girls to tell her all these rhymes. And it was so embarrassing because to tell an adult your secret rhymes and games is like secret children's business. And how she had to cajole me to say these naughty rhymes loudly into a microphone at our house, held by a serious-looking folklorist, Norm O'Connor, with a huge Bayer reel-to-reel tape recorder in 1964 or 65. I can't quite remember. But Mum was always very determined, and this gem is now held in the National Library. Folkloric recording of Martie Lowenstein, etc., etc. That's my girlfriends. And Richard singing and demonstrating children's rhymes. Oh dear. I was really smart and I just memorised the rhymes, but Richard was, I won't say, He was actually wrote them down in his school exercise book. So Dad got called up to the headmaster's office at Toorak Central because Richard was in big trouble for writing down naughty, disgusting words. Dad laughed and said Richard was doing exactly what his mother had told him. So that's our mother. What kind of mother gets you into such trouble at school? Usually you get yourself into trouble. So Mum started collecting folklore, along with bringing up 3 children, studying for a matriculation, completing an adult arts degree, a teaching diploma, a librarianship diploma, editing the magazine Australian Tradition, which was the folk magazine of the nation, and later becoming a pioneering oral historian, writing Weevils and the Flower, The Immigrants, Under the Hook, and Weevils at Work. Her archives in the National Library consist of over 600 hours of audio recording interviews and 4.4 metres of archive boxes. And I was there for 2 weeks and I could only look at a small portion. Poor Dad, no, Dad only had the one job, and he helped make school lunches and did the market shopping. So that's enough about the Lowensteins. So we didn't want to make a film that kind of idolised our mother's work. We wanted to make something a bit more broad. And the other dynamic woman who featured in our documentary, who we knew well, was Wendy's friend Shirley Andrews, who later became the director of the first National Folk Festival in Melbourne, 1967. And while other members of the Victorian Bush Music Club started recording songs and stories, Shirley will explain in the documentary how she began writing down the old Australian bush dances, which were almost dying out and only known in a few isolated country towns like Narreel near Colonial. In 1967, after the huge success of the National Folk Festival, there was bush bands developed like bushwhackers and cobbers. They popularised upbeat, loud, faster versions of the Australian folk songs and organised bush dances. So the dedicated folklorist's work did not disappear into the realms and the archives of the National Library, but it's become more widely known and still enjoyed and performed today in bush music clubs and the National Folk Festival and places like that. The post-war period was a time of social change when all this was happening, and our film briefly portrays that. Thousands of idealistic young people, often those who'd led the anti-nuclear and post-war peace movements, were determined to find and develop Australia's unique social culture so that it was not simply an echo of English or American music. And this culture must also value and record Indigenous songs. In the 1960s, we learned history about Captain Cook, and our preferences for music were mostly based on British and American styles. But in the late 60s, the Australian folk culture began to emerge. At the same time, the left-wing and progressive people began to push for social change. Many were disillusioned with the realities of Stalin, the invasion of Hungary, and rather than plotting to destroy our society, like ASIO seemed to believe, the ones we knew were pushing for social equity. They organised the peace movement, pressed for equal pay for women, feminism, better social housing, livable cities, conservation of nature. They started women's refuges and community organisations, pushed for free education, and established a more egalitarian, feminine conscious Australia, and started many of the social reforms we now almost take for granted. But obviously, we're still trying to work on some of them. At the same time, some people began to search and publish a very different social history of Australia, not centred on Captain Cook and prime ministers and that kind of thing. And that's the backstory to our documentary. It was made to highlight and thank these volunteers and these dedicated people who had the skills and foresight to collect Australian bush social culture. And we want very much to extend it to a full-length documentary to cover more aspects of the folk revival of Australia. And we'll point you to where you can assist. Richard has set up a crowdfunding website with Documentary Australia and applied for some grants, but we need everyone to help. And this is the web page that Richard will put in the chat. And you can see the names evolved from What Wendy Found to Formidable Women to Don't Be Too Polite Girls, because these were, in fact, very determined, strong-willed, amazing women who achieved a great deal. So our current story is from the viewpoint of two formidable women who were both who together were a dynamic duo, preserving and documenting folk music and dance and publishing contemporary protest songs. Of course, they weren't the only ones. There was a very strong movement in Sydney and other states, but these women were both very much part of Richard's and my life, as well as many other lives in Victoria, mostly in Victoria. But it's also the story of an adventurous and distinctly different Lowenstein family, which is an interesting story, and the origins of the National Folk Festival as a celebration where everyone participated, everyone enjoyed the music, amateur and professional. Dancers and singers were performed by everyday people. As children, we enjoyed protest marches, folk festivals, folk clubs, Pete Seeger concerts, and in 1969, as you'll see in the documentary, we all went on a one-year camping trip around Australia, collecting oral history, folk songs and stories. So the National Folk Festival in Melbourne, 67, had a unique philosophy of music and togetherness, and great fun was dancers and singers and amateur musicians. And I was really pleased when I returned again to the festival as a senior citizen to see that the spirit of cooperation, volunteerism, enthusiasm, and opportunities for amateurs and the audience to participate is still with us 50 years later. It could have morphed into a profit-making event centred on professional musicians, but it's remained true to its original ethics and is still strongly reminiscent of the 60s and 70s folk movement, with lots of beards and flowing dresses. So Wendy and Shirley followed their mission to preserve bush culture for later generations with great enthusiasm. They were unstoppable organisers and published books and worked on social equity. So I'll let the film tell the story. Story is not just What Wendy Found, but a story of an idealistic, incredibly active group of people who'd grown up through the Depression and World War II and thought it was time to make a better world where every person would be treated as equal and nations would hopefully eventually learn to live in peace together and appreciate different races and people and religions. It should be a greater length, and which is what with crowdfunding we hope to do. My thanks are to many people who helped me find all the material hidden at home and in archives in presenting Wendy's and Shirley's role in the early folk movement. We're extremely grateful for the wonderful archives kept by various folkies like Ken Mansell and the Sydney Bush Music Club archives helped by Sandra Nixon, and of course the wonderful archive material in the National Library Oral History Collection, the National Folk Festival and the National Film and Sound Archive. And we'll discuss especially the National Film and Sound Archive. Richard will discuss that later. And we're ready for the film. Thank you, David.
Wendy Lowenstein, as you probably know, has published quite widely. You might know that she has collections on children's rhymes, Cinderella dressed in yellow, or Shocking, 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 the improper play rhymes of children. The Immigrants, and then of course Weevils in the Flower, concerning the 30s, the Depression years in particular, and most recently Under the Hook, the history of the Melbourne Waterside Workers Federation. I would then like to introduce Wendy Lowenstein.
My father was a city bushman. He went every day to work, same place for 55 years, but his heart was in the bush. He knew that was where the real Australia happened. And I remember he gave me, for my 15th birthday, a copy of Henry Lawson, which had written in it, "We must be free or die who speak the tongue that Lawson spake." Romantic bush poetry stuff.
I've humped me Bluey through all the states, with me old black Billy, the best of mates. For years I've...
My sister was the first communist in our family, and she used to take me to new theatre working days. I was about 14, I suppose. The very first day I went, and I was standing there not knowing what to do, and a young woman came up to me and said, "Excuse me, comrade, would you mind helping me with the costume?" I don't know, she calls me comrade. I was converted. Then at the end she said to me, "Look, could you come next week too?" And I, oh, wow, try and stop me. Because it was such a wonderful thing for a kid to be treated by these very grown-up people who were putting on plays and were fighting for the peace movement and doing all these things. And it was such a whole new world. It opened up that day, and it never stopped. My brother said, "Look, you should come to May Day. You'd like it. You should be in the Eureka League," he said. And so he just sort of took me there and said, "Here, stand there, march." New theatre had been an absolute joy to me, but this was better because it was younger people and they were doing really remarkable things. I was a child of the middle class and I was a great reader, and so many of the young people there, it was absolutely a new life to them. It was a new life to me too because I was a lonely child. And we had terrific social things. We had campfires down there on the river. And the singing will never be lost. The left wing always had the best songs, they just had the worst guns. We are the youth, and the world proclaims our song of truth. Everywhere the youth is singing freedom song, freedom song, freedom song. People who were famous artists, famous singers, academics. And it was this whole thing, it just swept you up. It was wonderful.
Frank Hardy used to come down at night and sit around the campfire, and Frank for the first time sang The Overlander. Pass the Billy Ram Boys. Pass the Billy Ram Boys, don't let the fight cross and land, for tonight will be forever. And I learned that off Frank, and I taught it illegally.
We had a vigilante committee.
He used to come with their torches and look in the tents.
I was on one of these one night. You were dragooned into it, but you would see young couples at the camp. Obviously they had the hots for each other, but there were powerful forces at work there that not even the vigilante committees could have stopped.
The first thing she said, "I'm a journalist." Oh, she was a proofreader on the Guardian, wasn't it? And then we kept on going together.
Oh, kisses sweeter than wine.
When my husband proposed to me, I said, I really couldn't marry anyone who wasn't a communist. Oh, he said, "I don't know, Johnny, you never asked me."
When I was a young man and never been kissed, I got to thinking over what I had missed. I got me a girl, I kissed her, and then, oh Lord, I kissed her again.
Audrey Blake was the National Secretary of the Eureka Youth League, and I worked for her at that time. I remember Audrey Blake went to a peace youth conference after the war.
Russian zone of Berlin, 25,000 marchers from 60 nations opened the communist-sponsored World Festival of Youth.
And Lord Campbell and said, "Oh God, it's embarrassing. Every other country in the world's got thousands of songs. They ask you to sing an Australian song. All we can sing is Waltzing Matilda, The Wild Colonial Boy, and Botany Bay."
And then some of the people who'd been to this youth festival decided to hold a local one.
On March the 15th, in brilliant Australian sunshine, people began streaming into the Hollywood picnic ground for the opening of the Youth Carnival for Peace, and friendship.
And that was held in Sydney in 1952. Another group that was important was the Austral Singers. They were singing there, and they had been researching these Australian folk songs, and they were singing them at this period.
My husband Werner was in the Austral Singers, and they sang Australian songs with choral arrangements, very quiet-like. He and Doug Forsberg and other members of the Austral Singers were in the First Reedy River.
And the new theatre decided that they needed to do something using some of this material. They got together, and out of that arose the script for Reedy River, which was written by Dick Diamond. It was Sydney that first introduced the bush band using the members of the original Bushwhackers band. There was John Meredith, Alan Scott, Gay Scott, Chris Kempster.
And it was the most popular thing that New Theatre ever put on.
It was an enormous cultural revival.
All these things were coming together with the general feeling that a lot of people had, that they wanted to know a bit more about things that were Australian rather than things that were imported.
The success of Reedy River absolutely astounded New Theatre. People who'd never ever been to a play were going to New Theatre.
From Vermont to Bartholin, the shearers' camps were full. 10,000 blades were ready to strip the greasy wool. When through the west like thunder rang out the Union's call, the sheds will be sure Union, or they won't be sure at all.
The Folk Music Club did grow more strongly out of Reedy River.
A great number of people went abroad to youth festivals, so met people like Pete Seeger, and came home with songs like "There Once Was a Union Day" and "Talking Union."
What is folk music? I'm no scholar. I'm no authority. All I can say is that some people think folk music has to be 300 years old, good and mouldy like a cheese. Other people will say it's anything that folks sing. I usually think it's a quality that some songs have got more of and other songs have less of.
We started the Folklore Society of Victoria. Ian Turner and I started that.
That was founded more with the idea of studying and collecting material, the more academic side of folklore. The Billabong Band, leading members were Frank Nichols and Joy Durst. They started having regular, what were called sing-about nights. And they felt there was a different need for people who wanted to participate in singing and dancing. In July 59, they actually launched the Victorian Bush Music Club, now called the Victorian Folk Music Club. They were both joined together to publish a magazine, which was called Gumsuckers Gazette.
It started off as the Folk Music Club's newsletter. We called it the Gumsuckers Gazette, Gumsucker being an early name for Victorians. It was mostly an inner club thing with an occasional song or little story about some aspect of Australiana, and we started publishing the tunes and poems and songs which members of the Victorian Folk Music Club and the Folklore Society of Victoria were collecting. And then when we got a bit more circulation, we put out a more professional-looking journal which comes out 3 or 4 times a year depending on the amount of stuff which is available.
Pete Seeger would write me euphoric letters every issue and say, "Marvellous stuff."
When I first saw the people in Nariel, an area in northeast Victoria, that Corryong Valley is an isolated place and the radio reception there is very poor. It wasn't as influenced by radio as a lot of other places were, and they had all these families who were very good musicians and dancers. The Folklore Society organised this collecting trip and they asked me to go along with them, and that's where we met them all and they played all their music for us. I went to their New Year's Eve dance.
The old-time movement has been revived, and it goes back for 150 years. It's been handed down from my grandfather, who came from Germany in 1839, and he was one of the most talented.
Mum had just bought this tape recorder. He was tape recording in Greek, and Harry took them up to Creswell and introduced them to Simon MacDonald. I think we were looking for another Manky Snowy River or Wild Colonial. And Simon played his repertoire to him.
Boys, they make your heart in two. If ever you wax a coffee black, you very soon will know. For we used to go to bed, you know, a little bit after dark. The room we used to sleep in was just like Noah's Ark. There were dogs and rats and mice and cats and pigs and poultry. And I'll never forget the time we had while down in Bungaree. In the old bark hut, in the old bark hut, I've got to live on rations in the old
It was a success of the folk festivals in America. The Newport Folk Festival combined both the theatrical folk singers like Pete Seeger with the traditional players there as well. And it seemed to us like a good idea to have something similar here. Some of the prominent singers were interested. Martin Wyndham Reed.
Now come all you Lachlan and a terrible tale I'll tell concerning of a hero bold who through misfortune.
Glenn Thomas said he was another one.
Polite girls, don't be too polite. Show a little fight, girls, show a little fight. Don't be fearful of offending in case you get the sack. Just recognize your value and we won't look back.
Mother, may I go out to swim? Yes, my dark-eyed daughter. Mother, I would go out to swim, but at the pool I can't get in because of the color of my skin, because I'm your dark-eyed daughter.
It was held in February in 1967.
Well, here's Danny Spooner.
She's nothing lass, she's a bonny lass, and she likes her beer. And her name is Cushy Butterfield, and I wish she were here.
We got such a bigger crowd than we expected. And we had so many people they wouldn't all fit in.
One of the best known Australian songwriters, Don Henderson.
I woke up this morning early, said, morning sunshine, morning girlie, morning world, be with you in a minute, good morning, a bottle with a little bit in it. Where were you last night when I needed you?
Now, the next singer is Margaret Rodenau.
The lady comes to the gate, dressed in lavender leather, looking north to the sea. She finds the weather fine. She hears the steeple bells ringing through the orchard all the way from town. She watches seagulls fly silver on the ocean.
Got just one rather sad duty to perform on behalf of the Port Phillip District Music Festival Committee to regretfully close this festival and wish you all good singing and good playing until we see you again.
And now a singer who needs very little introduction is Declan Atherton.
I better have a cigarette. Frankly, I'll drop dead from sheer fright if I don't smoke now.
am a rake and a rambling man. Fortune I fall to where I can. Would I be other than a rake that's a rambling man? I travel far, I travel wide.
69, we went round Australia for a year. I applied for a Commonwealth Limited Fund grant. Gave me £500. I got a tape recorded gift to me by some bird. We had our four-wheel drive emblazoned with their name, Australian Folklore Expedition. It's on the front cover of the tradition here, actually.
No welcome hand overstayed. I never linger too long, for I'm a rake that's a rambling man.
Dear Shirley, I'm sitting in a tiny caravan trailer, which looks rather like a toilet on wheels, pounding on a typewriter in a camping ground in Geraldton, WA. Werner is working in Krasnostain's junkyard sorting scrap metal. Peter is humping bags of urea. His knuckles won't heal for weeks. And Martie is the youngest girl working at Coles. Richard's in the tent making a wire sculpture to send to his art teacher and correspondent.
As black as any crows could be. Cry, cry, cry. Said one black crow unto the other, where should we dine today, dear brother? Cry, cry, cry.
Now this is originally composed with myself.
Yeah?
On yonder hill, an old grey mare, I think, my friend, we shall dine there. Now that is why you'll often see a white crow among the trees.
That's how the old guys sing it to us. Wendy, my wife's got it recorded. We recorded a number of Australian folk songs.
If I go to a bloke and say to him, do you sing songs, do you play tunes, do you make up poems and recite them, or will you tell me about how you used to drive a bullock team, which is folklore proper, and he wants to tell me as well as all that about how his grandfather settled the place or his own part in the history of the area, I take the lot because I think it's a sin and a shame to leave that valuable material because no one else may collect it. So I spread my field from folklore to include oral history, local history, and I was particularly interested in the off-the-record stuff, the things that tend not to be put in books because people are very conscious when they're writing books that they're writing for the record, and they often don't realise just how much the byways of history are the fascinating ones.
Mero, they call them, for Jabby.
A Jabby. What's Jabby?
Jabby song, special song.
Jabby, Aboriginal contemporary song.
Oh, the whole corroboree isn't about the Japanese bombing, just the one song.
Only one song, yeah.
You wouldn't mind I sing this?
I love it.
It's very good you people to come and helping us like these sort of things. Anyhow,
it's about time, isn't it?
Yeah, about time.
Dear Shirley, our Aboriginal friend Paddy Rowe gets $40 a week for gardening at the store, while Peter, who is 18, gets $66 for the same job in the meatworks manager's garden.
Did you use the sing to the kettle? Or
Oh, yes, yes.
What's that for?
As long as you're making a noise, or whistling, or...
That's because if you go up to them, they could get a prize.
Yes, well, some of the boys, they sing out, "Hey, Nella, your wife's here, you know, don't you sing that one?"
Which one?
Little old drawers that Mary wore.
Oh, I know the little old drawers that Mary wore.
Yeah. They were tattooed, they were torn, they were filled with babes unborn, those little old red drawers that Maggie
Dear Shirley, too much travelling, too many awfully bad roads, broken pack racks, tow bars and trailer axles. In Wittenoom, Martie was riding a quiet horse when the saddle slipped. She ended up in hospital with a huge tropical abscess on her leg. Whitnoom is the most scenic place we've come across. The district has half a dozen magnificent gorges all running into each other and spectacular each in its own way. There are numerous pools of permanent water in the gorges, really beautiful, but the camping ground is rough as guts.
Ladies and gentlemen, the show is on. Ringmaster St. Leon introduces a death-defying Dupree's Act by Dempsey St. Leon.
You had to start small, I suppose, when you started.
Yes, well, they had 4 elephants. This is the sort of the backbone of it, and they were all good performers themselves and reasonably young, so it wasn't very difficult, you know. And in those days, things were much cheaper, and you know, you could do more with £1 than you could with 10 these days.
What's your other name, mate?
Perry. Michael Perry.
And you come over circus family, do you?
Yes, I am. 2 brothers, my father and his brother. They had a circus together. It was handed down from him down to my father and his family. And now it's down to about the 5th generation now.
And this is common in circuses, is it?
Oh, yes. Oh. They all run down from generation to generation, like Bullens and Ashtons. They're all run down from their parents down and down and down, you know, to the younger generation. The daughter's very keen on it, but I don't think the son's too keen on the circus business. The daughter likes the circus life. Lovely little performer, the daughter.
What at?
Well, does trapeze work and contortion work and all that sort of thing, you know, bending and all that sort of thing, contortion work.
How do they learn it?
Dear Shirley, we thought we'd go to Burketown, the place where Burke and Wills arrived at the Gulf. The car broke down and it took a week to get the spare parts in up. We had to camp right in the main street near the only shop. Not a tree or any shade for the tent or trailer. The water supply from the only bore tasted so revolting. Werner and I drank at the pub. The kids would only drink water with lemon cordial.
I travel far, I travel wide, from where winds spring to where winds blow. O'er every hill has an unseen side. Crossroads all quarrel, there are 4 ways to go. Perhaps it'll be that I'll never know fame. Maybe again I will. Bright lights might never write out my name, but it won't matter if I am still a rake that's a rambling man. I am a rake and a rambling man. Fortune I fall to where I can. Could I be, would I be other than a rake that's a rambling man?
So, Richard, you might want to speak about your work, because I've spoken enough. He's not awake.
Oh, yes, these credits go on forever, so we can talk over them. But I'll put because it's a little bit jerky, that version, I'll put over the Zoom, I'll put a link to the full-length version in the, not the full-length version, the 25, the same thing you've just seen, into the chat. And then you can always play it again. There it is. So yes, well, that was done mainly for Martie's Folk Fellowship, but as we discovered more and more footage and more recordings, we felt there was a much bigger story to tell of the folk movement, of Shirley Andrews as well as Mum. Shirley Andrews is in this version a bit, obviously, but her story is quite extraordinary as well. So we wanted to make the story of the folk and oral history movement, because seen through the eyes of these kind of 2 quite extraordinary women who both dealt with the era and their personal lives in very unique ways. Like Mum had a very unique way of bringing up a family, so she could do all the things she wanted to do, as well as Shirley kind of had her own way of surviving in that world as well, and being quite a renowned dance historian and Aboriginal rights activist as well, which is a fascinating story. So yeah, I I basically started researching all the different. Martie had all the audio recordings and things from the National Library, and I just started doing what we tend to do, which is searching for archival film footage, photographs, all the rest of it. And we started stumbling across through a combination of the National Film and Sound Archive, but also a lot of our connections in the film industry. We started stumbling across a lot of quite high quality film records, like the Realist Film Unit, 16mm films of not only the Eureka Youth League, but also the, I think the 1951 Berlin Peace Conference, all these things that were the formative times for the folk music movement and the tail end of a lot of these people's involvement in the Communist Party. As they got more and more disillusioned with communism, they kind of put all their activism into the folk music world and became less political, less actively communist, and more sort of folk music and dance, and then into oral history. So, and even recently we discovered the ASIO footage of that ASIO had been filming, now declassified, but ASIO had been filming all these May Day marches and things throughout the 60s and 70s and 50s. And so a lot of that footage, we suddenly discover both Mum and Shirley in that footage. And I think there's a bush band playing. The ASIO were quite keen on filming bush bands back then in the May Day marches.
Can you talk a little about the Duke Tritton clip we tried to get from the NFSA?
Yes, we had Mum was kind of whenever Pete Seeger came to town, Mum and him usually got together, and at one stage he'd made a film, him and his wife Yoshi, I think, had made a film of Duke Tritton in, do you remember the year it was, Martie? 1963, I think.
Not sure, no.
And he donated a copy to the Sydney Bush Music Club, but he also gave Mum a copy on 16mm, which had just sat on her shelf for all those years. And when she passed away, we donated it to the NFSA without really, we had a video version of it, but the quality of the 16mm is very high quality. And so then we were trying to get it back off the NFSA in order to scan it in high resolution and use it. And weirdly enough, that even though they have a policy of whoever donates the film can get it back, it was incredibly difficult to get it back off the NFSA, even though we donated it to scan it. But we eventually achieved it, or we found a high resolution copy somewhere. So there's a whole section in the longer version that we're working towards, which will encompass Pete Seeger as recording his trip to Australia and his recording of, I think, the Duke Tritton's Shearing the Bar was seen to be the last authentic folk song actually recorded, collected in Australia. I might be wrong on that, but it was, I know it was something Mum always wanted to sort of follow up on when in her 69 tour, was like she was hoping to find an uncollected folk song somewhere around Australia. And I think she did find that, Three Crows, but that was a version of Irish folk song, Twa Corbies, I think. So yeah, that was the big gold mine of the time, finding a uncollected folk song that drove a lot of them. That's why Simon MacDonald was such a find, that when he had his what was the ones he had some unique songs.
Copies of Bungaree.
Yeah, Copies of Bungaree, which was then printed in Tradition. So yes, I think
we want to leave it for questions, or?
Yes, I think we can open it up for any questions, as we're better with the questions rather than the
Okay,
the
thank you both. That was that film was a revelation to me. It was brilliant. I wonder if people have questions to ask, you can either use the technology to put a hand up or put something into the chat. So, Gwenda, I see your hand up there. You're muted, Gwenda. You're muted.
Okay.
We can't hear. There you go.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
It's about Shirley Andrews. Hi, Richard. Hi. It's good to see you both, and congratulations on a wonderful piece of work to you both. Just to add to something about Shirley Andrews, if you're paying tribute to her, she was not only active in traditional dance and also with Aboriginal rights and so on, but she was also a scientist, and she's had quite a bit of recognition in scientific communities. She was a pharmacologist, I think, and I believe she worked in one of the mental health institutions. She worked with Professor Cade, who was known for developing the drug lithium as a treatment for mental illness, one treatment. And Shirley was very involved in that. So she certainly deserves recognition for her role as a scientist as well as a folklorist and Aboriginal rights activist.
Yes, and I think also she was persecuted in her job at the CSIRO initially because she was dating a communist, and then she took on her, I think it's the Parkville Psychiatric Clinic, which she did research, Royal Park Psychiatric Clinic, the research that Gwenda mentions that into lithium. But it was, her story, we intend not just to pay homage, but it's going to be an even story of two remarkable careers, really. And they sort of did a lot of stuff separate and then kept coming together and intersecting and then going off on their own paths again. And it was quite, it should be quite a balanced portrait of these two women.
Yeah, thank you. Graham, your hand is up. Graham Shirley.
Yeah, look, really, Martie and Richard, really excellent documentary so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing, what eventuates. I've just got a couple of questions. I wondered if you knew of the existence of the Shirley Andrews extended interview about the '67 referendum, which is held by the ABC. It's a video interview. Wondered if you knew about that because it's quite a valuable interview. 1995, it's part of a series called Time Frame, and hopefully the camera tape for that interview, because it was recorded on video, has been retained. The other question I had was, do you know of the folk musicians who appeared in the Australia Council's Shot on 16mm oral history program? This would have been in the 1980s, actually. I've got some information on both of those things that I can send you anyway. If you
no, I haven't. I mean, I was in my chasing up of folk footage. I was quite amazed how little there was. So that 1980s footage that 16mm footage would be fantastic. But there seemed to be very little film, a lot of stills, but very little film recording, especially the first two Port Phillip folk festivals. You'd think someone would have done Super 8 or something, but that would be great. And especially the Shirley Andrews. I didn't know about the Shirley Andrews ABC footage, but we haven't yet gone direct to ABC Archive, where we're sort of had been sticking to the film and sound of the National Library, but
because the ABC costs money.
Yeah, on a side note, the ABC have absolutely no conscience at all, or no responding to worthwhile projects, and they charge a flat rate of $88 per second for whatever you use. They will give you viewing copies of everything, but $88 per second is very extreme, and they won't negotiate. They're very proud about their fact they won't negotiate.
But they may have audio programs
yes.
on folk music, which would be a little less expensive.
$44 a second. The audio is, yeah. And but it's been that rate for like 10 years, and they're absolutely outrageous. But this is one of the major things where crowdfunding this film is like, it basically, archival documentaries are incredibly expensive because the archive sources now recognize the worth of their footage, and they all make money out of it. So as soon as you want to show this, like, we're allowed to show it online, of course, but as soon as you want to show it at a film festival or even a one-off screening, all the accountants come out and hold their hands out. I mean, even the stuff of Simon MacDonald that you saw in the film, that will cost, once we actually take it towards a film that we can show in a cinema, that will cost close to $10,000, just that section, $10,000 to $20,000, just for the ABC to say, yeah, you can use that. And then they'll just say, take it off YouTube. It's like, they're really outrageous. But anyway, yeah, it should be in the National Archive and free. But anyway.
Yeah, it's probably worth your while having a chat to Robin Murphy. Regarding her documentary, Women of Steel, because initially they had no budget at all for archival footage. And yet they had so much support, particularly from unions, which made it financially possible to use the footage that they wanted to use.
Yes, well, we hope to do that because, Mum was very popular amongst the unions, and her work's very popular. So we do hope to open up the philanthropic donations to organisations like that, and especially because there'll be a section on Wonthaggi in the film and the coal mining strikes, and we have all that dramatised footage from Strikebound, which can go over Mum and Agnes and Wattie Doig's oral histories of the Wonthaggi. Funnily enough, we just discovered ASIO film of the Wonthaggi coal miners marching in the 1964 May Day, which is fantastic footage, and no one charges for it. In fact, ASIO footage. They just pretend it doesn't exist, so you can take it. The Realist Film Unit donated all their films in high resolution through John Hughes, who made a film about the Realist Film.
And the MUA supported us.
Yeah, and so that that footage, which also has Mum, as you saw in it, walking in I think the 1951 May Day March, and the EYL has we never expected the footage of Mum and Dad in the queue at the Eureka Youth League. Like never seen that before, and suddenly we're going, oh my God, that's Mum and Dad. And so all that stuff is fantastic and free, and hardly ever been seen, especially not in this. This is a great age for archival documentaries, because you can very cheaply get the original 16mm film scanned in HD resolution and 4K and everything. And before, in the 80s, 90s and 2000s, you would need, as I said, tens and thousands of dollars just to scan that film. Now you can, there's a great collaborator of mine called Ray Argall, who owns a scanning machine in Sydney, and he'll scan all that stuff for you for cost price, which is fantastic.
And you can improve the audio that Mum didn't always use the best technical techniques.
No, her recording techniques were just absolutely dreadful. And I know, because I was one of the knob twiddlers for a period there. But with artificial intelligence cleanup programs now, you can take all that bad off-mic echoey sound and had noise, and it just removes it, and it sounds radio quality. It's the noise reduction is quite extraordinary. So, I mean, you should, some of the recordings of her voice that you heard in the film just then, the original is unrecognizable. So it is technically it's a wonderful time to be making a film such as this. I just saw in the chat that someone's asking about how do you get the ASIO film. Well, it's incredibly difficult. You've got to be vetted by the National Archive, which is different from the National Library and it's different from the NFSA. You've sort of got to be vetted. And my friend Hayden Keenan, who made a TV series called Persons of Interest about 10 years ago, he had to go in there and stay in Canberra and basically sit in their lobby, like the scene out of Citizen Kane, I think, sit in their lobby until they finally just said, okay, here's some you can take with you. And he made all the ASIO footage available to me, but it's not by any means all of it. So I've had to put in a Freedom of Information request to the National Archive and probably have to go to Canberra and sit on their doorstep, apparently. But he says it's a lot of fun. It's like a spy film. Like you have to go in and they vet you and all sorts of things.
And the other expense, unfortunately, is for us Melbourne people to go and sit in Canberra where Mum and Shirley's archives are.
Yes.
To stay in Canberra and fly to Canberra is also rather expensive. 2 weeks I spent there, but you could spend 2 months because all Shirley's archives we sent. Shirley left all her worldly goods to Mum, and so we know them reasonably well, and we sent them up to the National Library. So we're familiar with at least her archival records.
No, I think it's the combination of the Realist Film Unit, ASIO, and all and as Graham was mentioning, the ABC. There should be some really great ways of telling the story that's not just still pictures and voices and things. I think it should end up quite a visual and dynamic piece. But the main work is the research and then getting, working out all the copyright of all this stuff and permissions and everything. All the permissions had to be sought even for this little film from the Paddy Darwin and Paddy Rose, their relatives, to get permission to use that Indigenous material, which I found fascinating. I never even knew there was contemporary Indigenous material. You always have the image that Indigenous materials from 1,000 years ago, but to actually hear that there's songs about contemporary issues like the bombing of Broome and things in Indigenous languages is fascinating. And Mum was one of the first to sort of think that was worthy of recording.
I'd like to just read out Mary Bell's question that you referred to here in the chat. I'd love to know how to access the film material of the ASIO footage, EYL, New Theatre, Berlin Youth Festival. Also like to know how to archive and donate material on the New Theatre and the Berlin Youth Festival and collaborate and find out more. So I guess, Richard, some of that might quite have come from the FSA, some from National Archives, and I guess from other sources. But there's probably more still out there.
Yes, I can answer I can answer them all. And they're separate. It's like the EYL, New Theatre, Berlin, all that stuff is the Realist Film Unit, and that all resides, and you can get viewing copies, low quality viewing copies, at the National Film and Sound Archive, and they're quite open and good to getting you the viewing copies. However, permission to use the high resolution copies is a little bit more complicated. However, the daughter, so I just momently forget her name, but the daughter of the cameraman who actually filmed that footage, and John Hughes, the filmmaker, discovered it in their garage, but the daughter is able to give you permission. I can find her name and
would that be Sue Matthews?
Yes.
Matthews,
Yeah.
And she's very approachable and wonderful, and but the NFSA are very strict about you can't use it until you get permission, or sometimes they won't even let you see it until you get permission. But I did manage to get high quality versions even for this short film, which was quite wonderful.
Richard uses his own networks.
Yeah, and also just to answer the ASIO I sort of mentioned before is a whole separate. I was hoping it was at the NFSA, but it's a whole different kettle of fish. It's at the National Archive, which is a very, apparently I've only had a bit of email interchange, but according to Hayden Keenan, who had to get including all the 70s footage of people like Gary Foley and the Black Power movement, and that was all ASIO footage. It is a very intensive and face-to-face process. You've got to go there and really put your National Archive. I don't have much experience with it, but apparently it's quite a bureaucratic thing. But it is, you've got to do a proper freedom of information request and everything. And then they vet, to see if it's, I think with this footage, they're not really worried, but they did something terrible in the 80s as they were worried about what to do with the film, and someone recommended they just screen it on a sheet and film it on video and then send the film to the laboratories to reclaim the silver in the film. And so that's what they did. And 50% of it's been destroyed, but there is a very blurry video version of it. But when you do get the original 16mm, it's quite remarkably detailed and crisp and beautiful. And that's how we discovered a image of our brother at 13 walking with the junior Eureka League, and it was, I think he denies it, but it's most definitely him. He's got all his mannerisms and everything, but we couldn't find out, Martie and I couldn't find ourselves in that footage. But when you do get the raw 16mm, incredibly sharp, but it's a scandal what they did to I think it was mainly the 70s footage. They just videoed it in low quality video and junked all the film.
I'll just go back to some more things in the chat. There's a message from GDP on Wurundjeri land. Hi, Martie and Richard. Thanks for a great start on an evocative and moving doco. I have more pics of Camp Eureka in the 40s, publications, etc. I would have liked to see a message at the beginning warning First Nations people that the doco contains footage of people who may have died.
I'm pretty sure that's there.
Okay.
I think we put that in, but
yeah, I'm pretty sure we put that in.
And we also put in that we'd received permission from all the relatives to show the people who had passed away. But the two families were Paddy Rowe and Paddy Darwin and Dick Ruffsey, three families.
We have very, very strong connections with the community up in Broome because we lived there for 6 weeks, and actually they're very, or Bart Pigram from the Pigram brothers, cousin or something, very respectful that Mum actually recorded at that time. So I also spoke to them about showing live pictures and sorry, I can't remember the names because it was quite a while ago, was very easygoing about it on the grounds that, in fact, you can see Paddy Darwin, who's Senator Pat Dodd's grandfather or great-grandfather, and Paddy Rowe both have web pages.
I think, yeah, and I do, but we will absolutely, if we have missed any of those things, we will absolutely make sure that all those Indigenous titles and permissions will be sought to their full degree.
Yeah, because the National Library were also very strict about that.
Can I, okay, there's a further message now from Liz Oley. Pete Seeger had a film, The Power of Song. Don't know if that shows anything about his Australian appearance, but it showed how he was an activist. He sang with the group Good Night Irene, but left when the group was about to sing about cigarettes. He was also responsible for cleaning up the Hudson River, sort of about 15 to 20 years ago.
Oh, dear.
Yes, I think I have seen that Power of Song. It's got some wonderful archive in it, and yeah, and you've got you've got to resource that archive and find where the original copyright. But we hope to do that if budget willing of everything, and get that all. You know,
I did try and contact. I went to the Library of Congress and try and contact Pete Seeger's grandchildren to get the rights to use that little bit of Pete Seeger. Not having any success in contacting them. I suspect there's quite a few people who do that.
Could I mention at this point there's a request from Judy Buckridge. Please send me the link to contribute to crowdfunding. What we'll do afterwards is circulate the links for the crowdfunding and access to the video we've just seen to everyone, so you can pursue that and go to the documentary Australia website and help to fund the film.
And donations are tax deductible.
Yes, they are.
Yes,
philanthropic donations, tax deductible. And on the website for the documentary Australia, there's a short teaser. It's only 8 or 9 minutes long, but it's a different link to this long one I've been putting in the chat, the 25-minute one. But we honestly don't mind if you want to circulate the link. We all attention is good attention in our book to raise. I mean, just on that ABC thing, we were offered at one stage a slot at Compass to screen Compass is on the ABC. It's only 27 minutes to screen a cut down version, and we were very keen, and that would have helped unlock some of the ABC archive and everything. And then with the recent cuts, they rang up and said, "Oh, we rescind our offer," which is not lovely. And it's like, but that's the only slot they have. You know, we used to get feature documentaries on the ABC, and they were very keen to put this on Compass, and then we could take the longer one to places like the Melbourne Film Festival, and they fund documentaries, and then it's sort of like it works like a domino. Once you have the ABC on board, everyone gets excited, and then Mad Men comes on, and the Myth comes on, and everything. And so the ABC, in their credit, rang up and pulled the first domino out, and so we're back to square one. But we do have Mad Men, Doc Play. I mean, Doc Play, they don't put up any money, but Doc Play is on most smart TVs, and they are saying that when it's all finished and 85 minutes and been in the festivals and everything, that they will put it on their streaming service, which is nice of them. That does help a little, but not as great as the ABC would have been. But we'll still keep trying.
Gillian Holt has a comment. Wonderful preview, doco, and commemoration of your mum's extraordinary life and story. Loved all the archive, including the 1969 family trip around Australia. Who was the filmmaker, and have you been inspired to retrace your steps?
That was, I was in a lot of the shots, so I can't have been the filmmaker. It was, I think my brother and my mum took most of the photos, and the Super 8, you see, unfortunately, is a little bit of a cheat. It was Super 8 we found on our previous film of driving around Australia in 1972. So it's not quite 1979, but it looks very similar. So there's a little bit of a cheat there, but that is great Super 8. But no, I don't know if there's the plot structure to recreate Trip Around Australia in a drama.
You have to understand that Richard was 10 and I was 15 at the time, and the idea of going around camping in the dust and the dirt and being broken down in the middle of nowhere wasn't exactly our idea of fun. And Mum threatened, when I said I wasn't going, to put me in a Catholic boarding school, which for her was, next to hell. So it wasn't, I think, until we became adults that we appreciated that it had been an opportunity rather than a drudgery.
Yes. And I do.
They didn't have air conditioning in that car.
And no, there was no air conditioning, and I do seriously remember being far more interested in Superman comics than what was going on out the window, you know, as we were driving across the Nullarbor. And Mum was always saying, put down that bloody comic and look at the scenery.
You've got to understand, as many of the children of, you know, who are red babies, that they're having a highly committed, highly active, organised parent who was, you know, working on protests and things like that, means that they had slightly less time and weren't doting mothers necessarily, or you had to make your own school lunch and things like that.
What would put it in perspective to me is when we're going around Australia, I would get asked to, you know, there'd be a gate across the road, and I'd be asked to go out and open the gate. And so I'd go out and open the gate, and then the car would drive through, then I'd close the gate, and more often than not, they would just drive off and leave me there. At least 3 times, I'd be left there at the gate until Peter or Martie said, you know, apparently once they went 20 minutes before Peter said, you know, Richard isn't here anymore. And they had to drive back, and I was just still quite calmly just sitting at the base of the gate waiting for them to come back. But it gives you a lesson on how important you were in the career of the. She probably had some old guy to go and interview, and I was just, you know, they were running behind schedule or something.
But you do, the other side of the coin is, since Mum died, I've heard some amazing stories from girls she taught about how she convinced them to continue their education and become teachers, how she taught them Indigenous history, and how she used to say, you know, you can't ever stop protesting, otherwise society will go backwards. She thought she was in charge of all this progressive action.
So, are there any further questions?
Yes, she was an amazing lady, but we didn't appreciate it till we were a little older.
Yes. And we also didn't want it to just be a kind of a eulogy to the amazing mother or whatever. We sort of, that's why, you know, it's very important to go. She was one of many who were quite pioneering in this field, and it's why we want to include Shirley, but also all the other the amazing folk singers of the time, the Glenn Thomasettis, the Gwenda herself, and, you know, the Norm O'Connors. It's going to be about the whole oral history and folk scene, but as seen through the eyes of these 2 kind of remarkable women. Handfuls, both of them, you know.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I'm going to ask if Martie and Richard might have some final comments you'd like to make, and then we can sort of draw the afternoon to a close. It's been for me incredibly informative, and I'm looking forward to what comes next. But over to both of you.
Well, just first of all, if you can just distribute the crowdfunding link far and wide, and as I said, feel free to send if people want to see more than just the 8 minutes on the crowdfunding link, or feel free to send the longer one. It is very tough at the moment for documentary filmmakers, and especially films like this, which you know, are not got rock stars or anything in them, and films like this 10, 15 years ago used to get great slots at cinemas like the Nova or the Kino or whatever. Now you have to kill someone to get to get into a cinema. But the Melbourne Film Festival is still very positive with us, and we have a great track record. So it will be a great night when it finally screens at the Melbourne Film Festival, and we'll make sure all the donators can get a ticket, definitely.
Evan just asked about the project you had with Billy Thorpe and Mark Fennessy.
Well, that's still waiting on funding. Again, as I said, that's a drama film, but it's it's waiting on funding, and that even that sort of stuff. Again, it's quite a political story with the formation of the Wayside Chapel at the same years that Billy Thorpe was in King's Cross in '62, and the content is not immediately, Stan or Netflix's cup of tea. So, but they're great scripts, and so we hope. It is, look, it's just incredibly hard to get things commissioned at the moment, especially television that isn't just normal Australian sort of people in the outback type things, or quirky country towns, or there's a murder somewhere, in someone's dead past. But it's like, we're working on it.
Okay. So, look, thank you, Martie and Richard.
Thank
it's
you.
Been a wonderful journey, just to see how this has grown over the years, and where it might go next. So, thank you both. This webinar will go onto the Friends website, so it can be revisited, and we look forward to the film, Richard.
Thank you. Hope I survive it all.
I hope we survive it all, Richard.
Yes. But thanks you all for listening. And as I said, spread the word, and keep track on our Facebook pages, Martie's, mine, and the history one. And then we'll keep everyone updated.
Thank you.
Ray, can I congratulate all those from the Friends of the NFSA? I can't tell you how delighted I was when I was checking on the link today to realise that this is house full. And I think it must be, certainly for the Melbourne group, it's the first time we've had house full, and that's that's a terrific tribute to Richard and Martie. Thank you very much, and to all the great team who took over when I retired from the Friends. Congratulations, all of you.
Thank you very much, Wendy.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
So
thank you, Martie. Thank you,
David,
for adjudicating.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Afternoon. Okay. Bye.